Hey everyone, just a quick disclaimer before we jump into this episode. The topic of this podcast is sex, and the content in this episode is going to get graphic. We want to be honest and open and real about the conversations we have on this podcast, and that's no different for this episode. And so if you are a single person or someone who might struggle or be led into temptation or sin by listening to this type of content, we would ask you to listen with discretion and be wise about if this is the best thing to put in your mind. And so we want to have these honest discussions. We don't want to hold back. We believe the gospel gives us freedom to have conversations in ways that might seem uncomfortable, but we do want to give a little bit of a warning and a disclaimer about today's episode. Hey everyone, welcome to Saints in Society. On this episode, we have two guests. I'm the host, Brad. Guest number one is Rick Reeves, and then we have joining us on this podcast for the first time, Allie Reeves, Rick's wife. On today's episode, we are going to talk about a topic that isn't talked about a lot in the church, and we really feel like we need to bring some clarity to. And so the big topic for discussion today is what everyone wants to know, KY or Astroglide?
Yeah, and also the warming sensation kind or not?
Right.
Yeah.
Ribbed condoms or just plain?
Yeah.
Or none.
Or none. Yeah.
Risque. Just kidding. Those questions won't be answered on this podcast, but we do hope to answer some of the questions that you might have about sex and how Christians should approach it and think about it, and how the gospel shapes and influences how we view sex in the context of marriage. So thanks for being with us. Excited for this conversation.
You are listening to Saints in Society, a podcast focusing on equipping saints to live in and engage with their society. As we dive into the Word and with help from experts in their field, we seek to learn how to engage culture in its terms, but not on them. We believe the gospel speaks to all of life and provides the answers we are all looking for, so we aim to equip saints with the tools necessary to apply the gospel to all areas of life, living as saints in society.
All right, here's my question to get us started. What would your death row meal be? If it was your last meal ever, you could have whatever you want. What would you eat?
Allie, do you know yours?
Yeah, do I have to pick out a certain sushi roll, or can I have like all you can eat?
Whichever you want.
It's your last meal.
Yeah.
Well, I'd have all you can eat sushi.
What roll would you go after first?
Like a crystal shrimp with some lemon inside.
All right. All you can eat. How much? Here's a personal question. This will be the last personal question of the podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How much?
The least of my worries.
How much sushi do you think you could put down? All you can eat. Like how many rolls?
It used to be more before moving to Oregon. Like, I don't know, 7 rolls?
7?
I don't know. 5?
Okay.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah.
5 to 7?
Yeah, I would say it.
I mean, nowadays it's maybe like 4.
You feel like your appetite's decreased?
Yeah, because sushi's really expensive here.
Oh, yeah. I
you
gotcha.
know, and so you can't afford 7 rolls.
Oh.
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay. Rick, what would your meal be?
Mine would be like steak and lobster,
Okay, yeah.
surf and turf, something like that.
Yeah, that's what I would say. Surf and turf. Really good steak, lobster, some like cheesy garlic potatoes, and not a single vegetable in sight.
I would be bummed though, because I'd want like my last 3 meals that day, because I'd also want like a good breakfast that was like pancakes and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Good bowl of cereal.
Yeah.
Oh.
Good bullet for last breakfast. Cheerios.
Lucky Charms. Yeah.
O's.
Okay.
Yeah, O's are good.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, we're super excited for this conversation. We have a guest, Allie, with us. Allie, how are you feeling about being on the podcast?
I am nervous.
Okay.
But also excited.
Great.
Yeah.
I don't care how you're feeling. Okay.
Ditto.
Allie's maybe a little nervous because today we're going to be talking about sex. We agree or think that sex is a topic that is not talked about much in the church. It's a topic that when it is talked about, it's talked about in a really weird way. And there's a lot of just cultural baggage, but also baggage that comes from our own stories when we talk about sex. And so, what are you smirking at?
Nothing.
Okay.
I feel like this is foreplay and I'm ready to get to it, Brad.
Okay. Can I just tease you a little bit more?
Yeah, fire away.
Okay. Before we start, we want to acknowledge that sex is a good gift. It's a good gift given by God that benefits his people. And ultimately, it's a gift that points us to the gospel, the act of self-sacrifice and laying down your life to please and satisfy someone who you're in a committed covenant relationship with is a picture of what Christ has done for us in the gospel. Now, we recognize that sex has been broken and messed with and marred because of sin. We've taken God's good gift, we've misused and abused it. And so there's all kinds of sexual brokenness in our lives and in our worlds. But Jesus redeems us through the gospel. He redeems the sexual sinner and the sexual sufferer, those who have sinned sexually and those who have been sinned against sexually.
That's good.
And so in that context, in the context of our identity in Christ, in the context of the church, we can be honest, we can be real, we can be raw. I knew you were going to smile. About sex and these conversations because of what Christ has purchased for us. And so we want to open up the conversation.
Yeah, and we should probably let our listeners know that Allie brings up our maturity level because you essentially have two 12-year-olds leading this thing.
She brings our maturity average up a lot.
A whole lot. Yeah.
Finally an adult in the booth today. So the smirks, the smiles, the laughs, it doesn't mean we're not taking this seriously.
Yeah.
It just means we're not taking ourselves seriously.
Yeah.
That was said well. Good job, Brad. Okay.
Brad, great job.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Yeah. So with that in mind, we want to have a conversation about some of the topics that we feel are oftentimes underaddressed or never addressed when it comes to sex. And we get to hear from Rick and Allie, a male and female husband and wife perspective on some of these things. So, Rick, anything to add?
No, the only thing, yes.
Okay.
The only thing I would add is that we are coming to the table right now with 11 years of marriage experience. We're not experts or sexperts, as you would say. We're also not sex therapists. We're just bringing our own experience into this podcast. But ultimately, I don't believe we have to be experts. I don't believe that we have to be sexperts or sex therapists or anything like that. Because if we're going to shape a view on sex, then we believe that our view on sex needs to be shaped by scripture. It's not like we're left to our own understanding to try to figure out how to make this the best. Ultimately, the person who created sex, God, gave us the way that sex is to best be enjoyed inside of a covenant relationship, that it's a good gift and whatnot. And so we believe that what we want to stand on is not our years of experience in marriage and all this stuff. We want to stand on scriptures. We have a conversation about sex.
Yeah, and we have not arrived. We are in this journey like all the listeners also. So, yeah.
I do think Jen and I have been married 6 years, so collectively we've been married altogether 17 years. So there is some level of...
Did you just like weirdly put us into like this commune, like polygamy? I don't know what happened there.
I didn't try to do that, but that sure is what it sounded like.
And then there's our friends who've been at 20. So then we're 37 years.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, we've just become sexperts.
Yes.
When you do the math right.
Yeah, that's right.
We're pastors. We don't do math right. Okay. So let's get into some of these topics that we feel like aren't spoken about much.
Yeah. I think a great place to start with what's not talked about with sex is, just quite simply, I don't think it's talked about. When it's talked about, it's weird. Can we say orgasm? Can we say sex? How do we talk about all these things? But I think one of the big things that's not talked about is how our stories have shaped our views on sex and how they impact our current sex lives inside of our marriage. And so our shame, our hurt, our loneliness, all of those things have an impact and are, affecting or impacting, I should say, our sex life. And I don't think that's necessarily talked about.
What are some common things that can come up in people's stories that would affect that might not get talked about because of the shame involved in them?
Yeah, I think, I'll speak for myself and then let Allie kind of speak for herself, but we have two different stories, two drastically different stories that arrived together in marriage. And when I found out that my wife was a virgin, I remember being in premarital counseling, and we were talking about our expectations around sex. And it was asked, Rick, what are your expectations? I said, I don't know. Like, they're not crazy, just to have sex like at least once a day, And our counselors literally said, easy, Tiger. But I thought that was practical and I thought it was conservative, this seems reasonable. All right. fast forward into our sex life, I thought that me marrying a virgin meant that I was going to be able to teach her everything, and she's just going to be crazy, horny all the time and excited about sex. And you take that, my expectations that I had on her, and mix that with my previous sexual experiences. My only view of sex was this person who's now my wife is meant to serve me. And so my sex past was you spit on it and that's what you do and you have sex. It's all about me. And that's what the woman does. And now there's someone who's longing for more than just the physical side of stuff. Like she wants to be engaged emotionally. And I'm like, this is, I don't know what to do with this, you know? Yeah. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. And he already shared I was a virgin getting married. I grew up in the church, so naturally it was very much purity culture. I don't think I ever really heard sex being like beautiful or anything like that. And so I came into it, and I didn't want to be like, oh, that Christian girl that thinks sex is gross, so I didn't think I believed that. And then fast forward into marriage, I'm realizing I think I actually believe that. Like the shame of growing up, or the pride or whatever it is of growing up not having an extensive sexual past has really affected. And I really do have to gospel myself in our sex life and Rick does a really good job too. I sometimes have to ask him, and this is where the honesty piece comes in of like, hey, I'm really struggling. I think this is I see myself as unclean when I do this act. And I'm like, dang, we're 11 years in and I still think this. So it does, our stories matter, whether you come into marriage a virgin or you come into marriage having a lot of sexual experience.
Yeah. And I think to go with what you just said, this is important for people to hear. Sometimes you might not start to realize the amount of maybe scars you have or stuff that you're working through until years into marriage. Yeah. Because there is a sense of like, this is fun and it's new. Because I would say in our marriage, the grossness stuff came about later. It was like 5, 6, 7 years in, I think, starting to deal with what's going on underneath this, that you're like starting to view sex as like gross or dirty and stuff. And so maybe some people feel like they're going backwards in their marriages.
That's how we felt.
Yeah. Or their sex lives, because they're like, this is getting worse. When in reality, we're starting to deal with what's going on underneath all of this. And just, again, we want to be honest in this. Part of my story is, in a sense, doing everything I can to not be hurt. And during sex, like Allie would be disengaged because it was painful for her. She didn't really want to do it. She was just making the sacrifice for it. But then I told her, I was like, I feel lonely while we're having sex. Like, I just feel like you're just laying there limp, disconnected. And I just feel very alone during this process. And so like, we're all of a sudden having to like work through all these things and be like, what is going on here? And like, then we realize we're complex and we have things that have impacted us, that have shaped us, that have, Well, and I think we've grown in our gospel understanding of who we are because we're able to share these things and ideally tell each other, okay, Rick can say like, you are washed clean. Like nothing you do or don't do can make you more clean or less clean. And so I'm like, okay, and so like those things like allow me to tell him this, and he can hopefully view me through the lens of the cross, and I can view him as like, okay, I can trust him. I can give myself to him. But I can only do those things because I'm already viewed like that from God the Father. Yeah. Well, I think that's helpful to say, because if you're looking to get, and I do believe that Scripture gives clear evidence for what it is for a husband and wife to affirm one another. And I believe both physically and emotionally, because if you look at the Song of Songs, what's happening there is there's a section where he's like just giving her praise. He's praising like all of her, but also there's like this, in a sense, where he's praising like her and her character and who she is, and she's doing the same. And so I think we should do that and provide that for one another.
Which is the emotional part.
Yeah.
Too.
But I ultimately think like we can do that, really well. I'm not saying we do, I'm saying that someone hypothetically could do a really good job of that, like singing praise over their spouse and admiring them and their beauty. And I think we should do that. But until you ultimately realize the amount of delight and pleasure that your groom, Jesus, has for you and declares over you. And like you said, he sees you as clean and you can't be seen as anything other than clean. But when we get to verses like Isaiah 62:5, Zephaniah 3:17, that says God rejoices and sings praises, he delights over his children, until we understand God's delight in us and is praising and rejoicing over us, then and that's the thing that gets to our soul, then I don't think there's enough that I'll ever be able to provide for Allie or she for me that's going to satisfy.
I think I've realized I often find I put the expectation on Rick that I ultimately need to receive from Jesus. So I am like, oh, if only Rick was way more emotionally intimate and pursue me that way, if only he would do that, then I could feel comfortable physically. It's like, well, yes, there's an element to where we can work on these things, and we'll probably get to that more later on. But I think until I have fully grasped the expectation on like the Father, then I guess what I'm saying is it's unreasonable for me to put that expectation on Rick.
You can't expect Rick to be Jesus for you.
Because he will fail.
Oh, yeah.
He fails.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Hence, most of our arguments are around sex and the expectations and the failures.
Yeah. Because again, my story said, this is where I'm arriving. This is how I believe that you should perform and how this should look. And this is how things should go. And so that obviously led to a lot of problems and a lot of unmet expectations that were unreasonable and whatnot. So,
yeah. So you just mentioned, and I've heard you guys say this before, that probably the most amount of arguments you have in marriage are in regards to sex and expectations. And we're saying that let's talk about how our stories are shaped us. Let's talk about what we need from one another. How would you encourage someone to go about these conversations? Because there can be, a lot of shame, all kinds of stuff that can prevent. So how did you guys get to where you could eventually start having these conversations? And how would you encourage others to go about that?
Do you want to start, Allie?
I tend to go to more practical, so I don't know where you would start.
Go ahead.
Okay, off the top of my head, a couple things is we've learned timing matters of talking about these kinds of things, which takes patience, I think, a lot of times. We were encouraged by a counselor to have family meetings once a week, where you go into these times with your spouse to talk about the week, talk about expectations, and those are a time where you're ideally supposed to be not defensive. You can talk about that. And so that, I think, helped us be able, like, for the environment to be safe, I guess, to share. That's like the first practical thing that I thought of for us that was helpful. Because if I had the tendency just to share with Rick every single thought that was on my mind at all times, and it wasn't necessarily healthy, because arguments would happen because he wasn't in a space to hear, I think, and vice versa, maybe.
Yeah, I think we need to be willing to ask honest questions.
Oh, that's good.
But also, if we're going to ask honest questions, then we need to give our spouses the freedom to answer honestly. Yeah. And I don't think you have the permission or the freedom to do that until you first have safety and security in your identity in Christ. Yeah. And so truly, until you know that ultimately the one person who is committed to you, the one person who is not going to abandon or forsake you, the one person who loves you. I mean, if you think about what Christ has done for his bride, he's given his bride all of his righteousness, all of his spotless, flawless perfection. And so, yes, he has this delight in his bride. It's, and so until Allie can grasp who she is in Jesus and that her ultimate thing is Christ, then whatever I say to her has the ability to crush her. And so if Allie goes, Rick, how do you feel about her sex life? And I'm like, I think it's awful. That has the ability to crush Allie if she first doesn't have a security and identity in who she is in Christ. And so I think that's where you have to start. Like, that's why I get so frustrated, Brad, and you know this, with churches that are like, yeah, gospel centrality. You're like, look, but there's very little gospel centrality worked into the fabric of the decisions that are made in the church or how they talk through stuff. And so I don't know how you could have an honest conversation like this without the covering that Christ gives you. Yeah. Until you know that you've been clothed in Christ's righteous robe and nothing can change that, then I don't know that you have the freedom. Then I think you have the freedom to ask those questions and then just let your spouse speak up. How do you feel about our sex life? Like, what are some things that would help you in our sex life? And I think both people need to be willing to ask these types of questions and then be willing to hear and to receive. Again, we are brutally honest, which I think you've kind of grown to see in our marriage. And I think that has the foundation of the gospel. Like, I told my wife recently, I said, will you pray for me before I go to bed overnight and pray over my mind? Because I oftentimes have sexual dreams or fantasies. And oftentimes they're about people from my past. And I'm like, then I spend the rest of my day feeling guilty and awful, like I've actually done this. And so we're able to have those conversations. And she's like able to tell me, she's like, okay, I have those types of dreams too. Like, can we pray for each other in this? And so I think the ability to be honest like that comes from a security that's not attached to our sexual performance, our body image, or you name it.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I don't think you can have the kind of conversations we're talking about without a gospel identity, because it will be crushing. Because I think like nothing else we identify with, our sexuality is, for I think a lot of reasons, some good and biblical, but I think a lot cultural as well. Like your identity is your sexuality and how good you are in bed and how attractive you are sexually and all those kinds of stuff. And so if your identity is so wrapped up in your sexuality and that gets attacked, like that's crushing. And so those kinds of conversations I don't think can happen in a healthy, honest, real way unless you have that gospel identity that you're talking about.
Gospel identity, go ahead.
Oh, even with a gospel identity, your feelings are still going to get hurt and crushed. But because of your gospel identity, you can run to Jesus. Yep. You know, instead of getting mad at your spouse. I think I went real practical on my answer. So that's maybe like step whatever. Because even if you have this, I said that out of protection a little bit, of you want like the safest place to be able to like not get hurt. But the truth is, even if you have the safest place to share, you're still going to probably get hurt.
Oh, yeah.
Even with like the best gospel identity understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then and within the same context, you have the freedom to say, oh, that sucks to hear. Like that hurts, you know, thank you for telling me, but you can talk about your feelings as well. I also think, Jenna and I have been married 6 years, so not a lot of track record, but to have the conversation continually, because seasons of life change sex life a lot, you know, like pregnancy and kids at different stages of life. And, you know, all kind of times of the year, like there's all kinds of things that change people's expectations of sex regularly. And so to make this a consistent part of a conversation that I think couples are having is really important. So you spoke earlier about the difference between male and female and the kind of the emotional, physical side of things. And I think my story is similar to yours. I think a lot of men go into marriage with expectations of sex that have been shaped by pornography and past sexual experiences, that my wife is going to love no matter anything I do. She's going to have so much pleasure. This is going to be the best experience for her because of how awesome and great I am. She's going to be horny all the time. And then guys get married and they're like, well, that's not true. And so can you speak a little bit more to the differences between men and women, the more emotional side, oftentimes for women, the more physical side for men, and how can we reconcile those things and meet together?
Yeah. I'll tackle the male side of it. I feel like that's makes the most sense.
Yeah. It would be fun. It
would be actually interesting. Yeah. Let's do it. Let's do that right now.
Oh dear.
I want you to speak, and then I can go first. But how are women engaged in sex, or what helps women to be more engaged in sex? And so as Brad's asking, there's differences in male and female from how we even connect. From your perspective, what does a man need in order to feel pursued and engaged? And then I will address what I think a woman needs to feel engaged.
Oh, shoot.
And
I don't know if I was prepared for this.
Pursued. Do you want me to start then?
Sure.
Okay. So this is what I've learned from being married to my wife. And again, I wish this would have been talked about, or there would have been something that someone said that said, hey, just so you know, your wife is going to want to be pursued emotionally. And that actually is something that can help turn her on or help get her engaged into sex. Because what I'm thinking is, just like any other guy out there, is like somehow my body is going to like get my wife going, or just the thought of like, if I lean over and kiss her on the neck or try to start making out with her and stuff like that, she's going to be into that. She's not. Like just to think like all of a sudden,
maybe
like
when we were dating.
Yeah. and so all of a sudden, like I'm just going to slide my hand up her leg and she's going to be into that. My wife, if anything, is taken back by that, because what she is thinking is that I want to know you. and I want to be known by you, and I want us to engage emotionally. And by us engaging that way, I actually start to feel closer to you, because what happens in that moment is my wall goes down and I feel like I know you. I feel like you're being real with me, and I feel like I can give myself to someone that I know and trust. So as you pursue me emotionally, what happens is I start to feel close to you, and then that closeness actually makes me want to engage physically with you. But when you just jump to physical, I'm like, walls are up. So that's me speaking on behalf of a woman. Agree or disagree?
That was pretty good.
Okay. All right.
You must pastor people. I'll give it my best shot. If you can chime in too.
Yeah. No.
Gosh. Bye. Okay. From experience of you, that's pretty much it. I think this is like, I'll just start here. I think men or you want to feel respected. That can look, I'll start with that word. I think you feel respected by me, even with like my attitude around sex. Not for it to be fake or I'm forcing enjoyment or whatever. I'm not meaning that, but kind of like a setting aside of my, maybe whatever I'm bringing to sex, and like showing you that like I'm interested in you physically. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. Well, there's two men right here. So I'll start, Brad, and then you jump in.
Okay.
So I think I'll share this too. We schedule sex, and I believe that there's a time and a place for spontaneity. And if you have that, great. But when you start to have kids and you have t-ball practices and dance and everything like this, and by the time you get your kids to bed and stuff, the man is oftentimes being like, yeah. And the woman is like, are we going to like do a check-in and see how our days were and stuff like that? And so I think if you can even schedule sex in, I don't know, 7-8 times a week. I'm just kidding. But if you can schedule it in, then it helps both the man and woman be prepared for that. And during that day, I can be thinking about, what does it look like for me to pursue Allie emotionally? Send her a text and say like, hey, I'm thinking about you. I love you. How can I pray for you? Anything like that. But she can also, I think, be doing the same thing from a female's perspective of like, hey, like, I'm looking forward to tonight, which I'm not saying to lie. And so if you can't say whatever you need to say with honesty.
Yeah. Or it's on my mind that this is going to happen tonight.
Yeah.
I don't know. Women, get out of your comfort zone. Send your husband a picture.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like.
Amen.
I think it's kind of true. I do think men have to push themselves to pursue emotionally, but women, we also have to push ourselves to pursue physically.
Yeah. Both people are going to have to arrive at the table with this understanding. How do I die to myself to love and serve my spouse? Because again, that's a picture of the gospel. Mm-hmm. It's not Jesus saying, if you do this, 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 and this, then you will get my love and affections. It's him saying, I'm going to give you all my love and affections when you never do any of these things. And I believe that 1 Corinthians 7 is a picture of that. Both people are arriving to say, how can I make this the best possible experience for you? And I don't think that's just during the actual act of sex and intercourse and all of that. I believe it's leading up to it. How do I pursue my wife emotionally? But I'm never going to know that if A, I don't ask her how she needs to be pursued that way, and B, if she doesn't tell me.
Yeah.
And in the same way, I can't expect her to know what it looks like physically, because hey, the things that I said, if I did to my wife, like I would love it if like you kissed me or kissed my neck or slid your hand up my leg.
She touched my leg.
She touched my leg.
That's it. That's all it takes.
It's more than enough. We're ready to go. But I would love those things. But how would she know that if I didn't tell her like, hey, sometimes I don't want to be the one that's like always engaging this, because it feels like I'm just like trying to drag you into this, you know? So I
think we believe the lie that we shouldn't have to say this to our husband. Like they should know us, or she should, or vice versa. But we do like way over communicate. You need to probably over communicate than you think.
Yeah,
you do. There is a quote from a book that Brad's wife shared with me, and it says, it's from Look and Live, the book, and it says, love is a cost to me, a good for you, and a joy for both. And I think that's like, I think I need to write that every day somewhere, just to remember, like in sex, like it is a cost for me, like it's a sacrifice. I don't feel like having sex a lot of the time.
Yeah.
You know, but I know it's a good for Rick, and it is a joy for both of us. Our marriage, the covenant we made, it's a protection too over our marriage.
Yeah.
So I think that is like a good quote that stuck.
Yeah.
The differences between men and women can oftentimes frustrate us, but like God made us that way.
Yeah.
Like it's part of God's design in marriage for two people to approach the same thing very differently.
Sacrificially too.
Yeah,
Exactly.
sacrifice.
Yeah.
Because again, if it's easy for me emotionally, then I would just do it, but it's not. If it's easy for Allie physically, she would just do it, but she doesn't.
Because it's supposed to point us to Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
This week's local business spotlight is the Washburne Cafe, and this was started up by owners Derek and Mindy Weber and Charlie Hester. They had this calling to create this awesome coffee shop in their hometown of Springfield. They didn't really have any plans to start a coffee shop, but then the cafe kept popping up in their mind. And finally they thought to themselves, maybe we should at least try this. They knew it was a very crazy idea that they weren't equipped for at all, and thought that they'd hit a roadblock, but somehow the Lord just found a solution at every single one and made it happen. Now, it's the Washburn Cafe. The Webers and the Hesters knew this business would be incredibly challenging, but the plan from the beginning was to do all that they could to support their community in more ways than just serving good food and good coffee. They grew up in Springfield and barely set foot downtown. Other people's opinions downtown were similar to theirs, and they really wanted to be a part of changing people's minds. The Washburn is meant to be an open door where anyone from all walks of life would feel welcomed and cared for. And that's honestly how I feel when it comes to the Washburn Cafe. I love their open design, and I come in and see all their mid-century modern furniture, and their coffee is just so good. The Washburn owners love to support other businesses in town. A lot of the produce used in their products is actually from local farms, and what they can't get from farms is sourced as local as possible. They make as many things from scratch as they can and put quality first. The retail shelves in the cafe are also full of products from local makers. So please check out the Washburn Cafe, go support a local business, and support your local artists and everything else, because they like you.
All right, let's get to what the people really want.
Let's get to the
my
nitty gritty.
Let's get to the down and dirty.
Yeah. Yeah, stop. Yeah.
Okay.
No, keep going.
Us good Christian folk in a marriage relationship, you know, there's lots of dirty stuff about sex, and so everyone wants to know, is there anything off limits in the bedroom for everyone wants to know?
That's a good question.
You.
Again, I think these kind of questions should happen in discipleship, and men and women inside the church should be talking about this stuff, but we're not. And then I think that leads to a whole other host of problems, pornography and everything else, because we're not talking about sex.
Yeah.
And I think it leads to married people being frustrated and everything like that. And so, yeah, I'm glad you asked the question, Brad.
Oh,
thank you.
Why do we like to paint our marriage and our sex life way better than it is? You know, like we have that compulsion, I feel.
Yeah. Yeah. So your question is like, what's off limits?
Yeah, I think my wife and I were having a conversation the other day of like, there's some acts that like just feel dirty.
Yeah.
Because it's like, should we do this as Christians? Is this okay? Yeah. You mentioned earlier growing up in the church and purity culture, which was this movement in like the early 2000s of like sex is a bad thing and you save it for marriage. And then by the time people got to marriage, it was like, well, this has been a bad thing for my whole life. Now it's supposed to be all of a sudden turn into this good thing, and it creates a lot of harm and pain.
Yeah.
And so for those coming out of that kind of culture, for those coming from the other side of the things, the licentious side, that's like everything's on the table, but now I'm a Christian and what is on the table? Yeah. Is there anything off limits for the Christian couple in the bedroom?
Yeah. You want me to start, Allie?
Yes.
So I would say yes. There are things that are off limits. I think what makes it off limits is what my spouse is comfortable with or not comfortable with. And so I can't push my wife to do something that her conscience is not clear in. I mean, if my wife is not even comfortable being naked, I do think there's going to have to be some gospel care and love and tenderness around those areas, because if you as a husband want the lights on during sex, if you and a husband would like certain things and it's never going to get there, I do think that's going to take some time to explore why. Because I think you can't just give someone practical things or pragmatics. There's something inside going on. You're going to have to deal with what's going on at the heart level. But I think inside the bedroom, I think anything goes. So for instance, we believe that Christians should have the freedom to use a vibrator. That's something that's never talked about. It was never talked about to us. And part of it is it's even, I think it's like, I'll have to go back and look, but the statistic is really low on women that can actually reach an orgasm during intercourse without something like that. And it's actually, women have a lot higher orgasm rate through oral sex and through like other stimulation that is provided like a vibrator. Does that mean as a man that I'm not doing my job or that like, or something like that? I don't think so. Again, I think the gospel provides a sense of freedom, that it's not all about my performance, it's not all about what I can do. And so I think you have that freedom. I think you have the freedom to do any positions that you're comfortable doing. I think oral sex, I think we can support it from the Song of Songs, that's a way to engage. I think all of these things can be a means and a way to help one another grow. I think, you know, you can get into stuff like role playing, and then you ask is this okay in the bedroom? I don't know. Are you role playing that you're like someone else who's not you? And then I think that's where like you're starting to go against the biblical commands, like, you know, Allie, call me Steve or something, you know, and like, I don't know, like I'm someone else. I think that gets weird and outside of like the biblical grounds where I'm being someone else now in this weird imagination. And so that's a few things. I don't know what you would add to that. Like, if we're being honest, a lot of people have asked, I'll just keep going, about anal sex. Like, is this something that should happen in the context of marriage? I'm going to leave that up to the couples to pray through. To me, from anything that I've done or research on, that hole has one purpose, and it's an exit hole. I'm just being honest. And so, I've also heard that there can be a lot of damaging things that can come from that. And so that's what I would say. Again, where's your conscience at with stuff like this? Yeah. So are you being sensitive to your conscience? Yeah,
sensitive to your conscience, sensitive to each other.
Yeah,
in that.
That's good.
I think bringing in community to talk about these things. And I know that the more freedom we feel in the bedroom, like probably some of these things can change, you know, like maybe the husband wants something and the woman's not ready yet, you know? Yeah. I'd say like keep working at it, you know?
Yeah.
Like keep having the conversations, bring in counselor, keep talking about it, because it could be part of your story you haven't like worked on, you know? Yeah. But I'd say at the same point, it's not just on the wife. It's the husband is being sensitive to her and kind of laying down what he wants and sacrificing that for a time or forever. I mean, on this side of eternity.
Yeah, I think the other thing that can be helpful with some of this stuff in the bedroom is, again, the preparation that happens before the bedroom. Mm-hmm. So to speak. And so if on a date night, the only thing you're doing is slapping your wife's butt and being like, I can't wait to get you home and get that dress off of you. It's almost like a country song or something.
Multiple.
Yeah. You are not doing anything typically through those actions to like engage your wife in a way that she probably feels cared for. And so when you get home by doing all that stuff and you're expecting for your wife to jump your bones, I wouldn't expect that to happen.
Yeah.
But also, do you pray before sex or even pray during sex? And here's the thing, we do that, which we've told people we do that.
Because we were weird.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Because there's sometimes again where Allie's like, hey, I feel dirty and like I'm having these experiences. And if it's a good gift that God has given, I believe we can engage God during that, you know? Mm-hmm. And so you can make all the jokes you want, like maybe it helps you last longer or something like that too. But I do think there's something about even before, maybe during or even after, like praying as a couple and engaging something, because again, it's bringing like our relationship with Christ even into this act where people maybe feel like it's gross or something like that. And
it's a way a husband can show their wife that you actually care about their soul and you don't just want to get your needs met.
Yep.
You know, it's awkward at first, you know, like let it be. Yeah. Let it be awkward. Laugh through it. We laugh a lot through that. I want to say one thing, like in preparation for maybe having sex or like just thinking about it, having it on your mind. It's not a bad idea. I think I hear a lot of women say like, by the end of the day, I just feel gross and I'm just tired. And I had a community group leader in the past say, I tell my husband, hey, I'm going to be in the bathroom for like 15 minutes. And she's like, I shave my legs. I get myself ready to where I feel pretty, you know? And it made me think, I'm like, oh, she's actually like taking time for her husband in that way. You know, that I think we excuse it a lot of like,
Yeah.
do you know? So there's things we can do to make the experience.
The other side
better.
of that too is like if a guy just gets home off work and comes home, throws on ESPN and puts his feet up,
Yeah.
the woman's tired from doing everything all day and whatnot. And then afterwards the kids are in bed and he's like, hey, let's have sex. It's like, that's not going to fly. I think, again, this comes to are both people thinking about how do I love and serve the other person?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's good.
And we've talked about this a little bit, but God's designed for sex. We could read all the magazines in the world to try all these 10 positions, but the place that sex is going to be most enjoyed is in a covenant relationship, period. Like you can try the 10 new positions, you can try this to spice up your sex life, but God is the creator of sex. And he told us, this is the gift I've given you. This is how it's going to best be enjoyed. And that happens inside of a covenant marriage where both people say it's not based upon your performance here. It's not based upon sex. Like our marriage doesn't rise or fall based upon sex and sexual performance or anything like that. We have a covenant because there might come a day, and this is the truth. My wife might not be able to have sex with me. I might not be able to have sex with her. Does the marriage just end and fall apart because that's all it was? No. Like this is a great gift inside of the context of marriage, but it's not everything. And I think it'd be a great time to maybe mention something about singles too, as we talk about sex.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think as we have this conversation, a particular demographic can feel left out, and that's those who are unmarried and might never be married. And we talk about sex as being this awesome, great, wonderful gift that is a pointer to the gospel, and there's like so much blessing in it and everything. And it's like, okay, well then to the person who never has sex because singleness or a medical condition, or for someone who is celibate for whatever the reason, are they somehow missing out on God's gifts? Are they somehow missing out on something that married people get more of, something from God that people who are married have access to and single people don't? We would say no, that's not the case.
Mm-hmm.
That sexuality is not the penultimate like mark of what it means to be human.
Yeah.
Having sex is not like what it means to be human. Jesus was fully, totally, completely human, had perfect relationship with the Father, perfectly satisfied, perfect joy, perfect intimacy, and never had sex. Paul was a faithful man of God who was single, and we wouldn't say that he is less human or somehow less spiritual or less holy or anything like that. And so sex, the good gift that it is to be enjoyed in the context of marriage, it's not the only one of God's gifts, and it's not the only thing that gives us access to what the gospel is. And so, yeah, we don't want single people to hear a group of married people talk about how awesome sex is and feel like, oh, well, I'm left out of this. And that's easy for us to say.
Yeah.
We'll admit that, not being in those shoes, but you're not somehow less of a human because you don't have sex.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or experiencing less joy and
Right.
pleasure in life because you don't get to have sex.
Yeah, for sure.
I know we're about out of time. Can we give, and we try to do this, but like a few practical things to kind of end with?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So how about I'll give 2 or 3 practical things, because maybe you're listening to this going, great, where do I go? Where do I start from? I think going back to what you said, to have like a family meeting or something like that kind of time and space is great. But ask this question. Both couples can ask, hey, is there an area that you would like to see, I don't know, improved in our sex life? Or how do you feel about our sex life? Or how can our sex life grow? And both can engage that and be able to answer that question. And so I would even start by asking that question. I think the second thing I would say is learn to give a lot of encouragement inside of your marriage. I don't think we're the greatest at it, but we're growing. If you read Song of Songs, what you see is a lot of that, those 8 chapters is them actually like praising one another and just encouraging one another. And I do think my wife is the most beautiful woman on the face of the earth. I really do. But I think it's more than that. I think it's saying like, hey, I really appreciate this about your character. I really appreciate this about you. And I think actually taking time, but I also think the men need to hear that thing too, because men have body image struggles just like women do, to be like, I'm uncomfortable taking my shirt off, or like, I don't like the way I look. And so I think the woman also needs to give affirmation to the man, to be like, hey, I like this, or I love this about you, or I'm thankful for you, whatever it is. I think those things really help. Mm-hmm. They don't just do a work as you receive them, but they also do a work as you learn to give them as well on your heart.
Yeah. One thing I have is, and it's something I'm just currently learning actually, again, or deep more deep.
Yes, go.
Rick, I knew that was coming.
Please go on.
Being someone who longs to be seen and heard,
Yeah.
I think we have to like start getting better at reminding ourselves of our identity, like daily, because if I remember that God sees me, he loves me, and he's so pleased with me, I can lower that expectation on Rick, which actually makes me enjoy Rick a lot better, because I'm not like, well, he needs to be doing this and this and this, and I'm displeased, and then take that into the bedroom. It's not magically going to change. But if I can live my day knowing I'm so pleased, I'm like, oh, if Rick didn't do this, I know I'm still pleased and seen by the Father. So I think we have to do a better job, and don't beat yourself up if you're not doing a good job at it. Yeah. But we have to start practicing reminding ourselves of our identity as a child of God, and not putting that on our husbands to do.
That's good. Yeah.
That's great.
I have another one.
Mm-hmm.
So again, this is getting into our personal sex life, but this is something that's worked for us. So Allie could be fine going quite some time without having sex. And I do think you're really good at sacrificing in that area, because it's not something that you're thinking about or like I'm really excited about or anything like that. And so one of the things that we've done is you determine kind of like, hey, how many times would you like to have sex a week? And even kind of like talk through that, because some people are like, well, once a month, or, you know, a woman could say that and the guy's like 4 times a week. And so like we were able to have that conversation. And then the follow-up conversation, that was like, what is the expectation that these look like? And so we have a basic night, just like, but then we have a little bit more of an exciting night.
Or like an intentional night.
Yes. And so like we've been able to talk through those things, and that's been really helpful for you. Because you're like, okay, tonight is this night. Tonight is a more of an intentional night and whatnot. And so I think that's something that's been really helpful.
Yes, that's probably recently been the most helpful.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Also, again, and I know we've said this, but I don't think that either spouse, if you read 1 Corinthians 7, should have to be begging for sex. I think both people are going to have to die to themselves and say, hey, how do I best love and serve you in this area? And so I think this is going to go back to asking questions about expectations around sex, how many times and stuff like that. But like, I don't think the man should have to beg, and I don't think the woman should have to beg for it physically or emotionally. Like, you know, I think that's something where it's like, we're going to have to say, because what Christ has done for me, this is now how I live in response to that. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you have another practical thing.
Pray.
Yeah.
Which is something, I mean, we're really talking to ourselves too right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like pray. And I think I lose hope kind of. So I think pray that we have a God who like loves us enough to want to change these things inside of us, you know? So like that we'd be sanctified, that we would grow in these things. You know, I pray someday that it won't always have to feel like a sacrifice. Yeah. But if it does every day or all the time for the rest of my life, so be it.
Yeah.
You know, because we have like Jesus in it with us.
Yeah.
That's good. Thanks everyone for joining us on this episode of Saints in Society. Our goal for this podcast is to talk about how we as saints, holy ones in Christ, engage with our society. And sex is a topic that our society has a lot to say about. And a lot of what society says about sex is wrong and skewed and just brings about a lot of brokenness in our lives and in our world. And so our goal today was to look at what Scripture has to say about sex, to talk about this from a perspective that is glorifying to God and influenced by the gospel. If you ever have any topics you would like us to cover, questions you'd like us to answer, you can always email Zach. His email is in the description of this podcast, and we will see you next time.